So, in the end time prophecies, towards the very end, after the descent of Christ, even, there will be more warfare, and for a very short while, an Asian tribe will take over the entire earth. In the old European texts, this tribe is called Gog and Magog. The Arabs call them Juj and Majuj. First, I will let you hear the Arabic prophecies about the role of Juj and Majuj in the end time game, and then some Slavic and European prophecies about them, maybe again. I say maybe because after you hear the Islamic prophecies, it will be obvious that the most likely candidates for Juj and Majuj are the modern people of China. However, we all know that Gog and Magog doesn't necessarily translate as China in biblical or European historic research necessarily. Certainly, the name Gog and Magog does appear on the old European compiled maps of the world, on Chinese territory as well, but that is not the prime location. Most often, that name appears in Siberia, and sometimes even in Europe and probably Africa, actually, I believe as well. And I start with that clarification because Juj and Majuj is most definitely translated from Arabic as Gog and Magog, but Gog and Magog itself is extremely elastic term. As, by the way, almost all names on the old maps, if you have seen the survivors documentaries, they are Indias in India, in the Arabic Peninsula, in Africa, in America, and that is just one of the many such examples of using the same name for completely different countries on different continents. One example that I did not include in the survivors documentary is the old name of the old capital of Siam, Thailand. Now we call it Ayutthaya, but in the older times, people called it Judea. The old maps with such a name are not denied by the official historians. They simply forget to mention them as usual. This is their usual trick. Instead of that, they only mention names which fit well in their fabricated history. So I mentioned all that for you not to get misled by the modern interpretations of the meaning of Gog and Magog, Juj and Majuj. The truth about Gog and Magog on the old maps is that they're all over Asia and even other continents. In the Islamic end-time prophecies, we find that even after Christ descends and kills the Dajjal, the fighting doesn't stop. There is a little bit more, because after all that warfare for about 7 continuous years, the earth is largely depopulated. People basically killed each other in wars. And at that time, the clever Juj and Majuj decide, oh, now in this chaos, we can finally conquer the entire earth. And it seems that they do so, including the Middle East, even Christ himself, along with the handful of warriors which fought the Antichrist. In the Middle East, even they're advised by God not to fight Juj and Majuj directly. God told Christ, although Christ is an incarnation of God, but still, in a sense, they are different entities. And the Lord told him, these are unscrupulous and cruel people. Don't even attempt to fight them. Just hide with your people in the mountain valley and wait. So Christ and his people hid in the valleys and waited. They actually didn't even know what is going on. They could only hear all the time the loud talks and screams of this army of Majuj and Majuj, because the way they're described in the Islamic sources is that they're very numerous. Like behind every bush there is 100 of them, and they make lots of children. They propagate very quickly, and there is just an endless number of them. And there are also people without any manners. They talk loud, they spit around, they throw garbage, they scream. And that's why their screams could be heard even in the mountains. So at one point, Christ and his people could not hear the loud talking anymore, and then decided to go out and check out what's going on, to find that all Majuj and Majuj have been killed by the providence, by God, who sent some sort of worm disease which attacked their neck area and rendered them dead all at once. And since this army was so big, there was so many of these people and all of them died at once, burying them was absolutely impossible. There were too few people left and they started rotting, which obviously polluted the air to such an extent that it became a danger for those who survived the ordeal of the tribulation. And at that point, the Islamic sources continue, God even arranged for their, you can say, burial. And because the same story is told in various old sources, there is a variation of how exactly this burial takes place. Some places say God sends huge birds. Other sources say there is continuous torrential rain which flushes down everything. Well, possibly both sources are true because both things may happen. So that is how they meet their end. And who are they? There are a few more clues in the Quran. There is this story about an ancient king called Dhul Qarnayn. And once, when he was traveling in Asia, he met people who were greatly troubled by another very uncivilized, wild and cruel tribe of troublemakers called Majuj and Majuj. Dhul Qarnayn could barely understand the language in those lands. Even his translators could not help him. But somehow he decided to help the people who were getting constantly attacked by Majuj and Majuj, and he built a great wall, a massive wall. He closed the mountain passage so that the Majuj and Majuj would remain contained in their territory only. And he told them that you better stay in your land only until the very end times. Only then God allows that you come out and trouble the other people, which seems to be your nature. And that's why Majuj and Majuj will be able to show their true colors and intentions to the world only during the end times. Now, what do we know about China, having Alexander Paramenov's source of ancient Slavic knowledge? According to him, the Chinese race was introduced to Earth somewhere in the beginning of Kali Yuga as a warrior race to overcome the indigenous at that time population of the Hyperborean people. And it seems the scenario was similar all over the world. That's why, as shown in many episodes of these survivors, we find those Caucasian mummies on all continents: Australia, South America, certainly in China. And of course, the modern historians, who are just prostitutes for those who organize wars, even to the point of tampering with the DNA of the races to divide and conquer. That's why these modern historians, they always as a rule ignore these Caucasian mummies. And Paramenov continues that although the Chinese were originally introduced for that purpose, Eventually, they actually made the Hyperborean gods their teachers. And initially, they did honor the agreement to stay behind the Great Wall, which was clearly made to settle any future disputes of the territory belonging to the Aces, Asgard, guarded by the Aces and the other races. Interestingly enough, the new chronology team of Anatoly Fomenko reached more or less the same conclusion just by investigating the wall. A link to an older video about the Great Wall of China is found in the description. And then in a recent interview, somebody asked Alexander Paramonov casually, what would be the future of the Chinese nation? And he immediately replied that unfortunately nothing good awaits them because they broke the agreement about never crossing the wall. And then he even listed the exact territories where they took over lands which were not assigned originally to them with the original agreement about the Asgard. And because of that, he continued the guardian deity of their race, which is the red dragon, actually abandoned them. And he says that once a nation is abandoned by its guardian, its future is always grim. And as you can see, this story of the agreement of a nation to stay behind a great wall is very similar to the Islamic story of Dhul Qarnayn and the order, the agreement he made with Majuj and Majuj. And by the way, Gog and Magog are of course mentioned many times in the Bible in relation to warfare during the end times. Sadly, biblical texts are quite difficult to understand, and we don't know if even Gog and Magog in the Bible has the same meaning as in the Islamic prophecies. And it is even more confusing because during the end times all nations will be involved to some degree or another in warfare. The Islamic sources also give a hint about their physical appearance of Gog and Magog. They will have this typical Asian faces, and they will be short people, definitely short. In the old Russian texts, China is called Sinai, and that means the place of our sons, because they were so small in height compared to their teachers, the Hyperboreans, that the later called them sons, and their land, the land of the sons. And as the end times approach, the sons again turned against their own masters. Here is a highly rated video on the ancient history of China, which may turn out to be not that ancient after all. This is an old Christian prophecy describing Gog and Magog as seizing an infinite body of men and riches for themselves. And as far as their end, the angel shall go forth and destroy their armies in the twinkling of an eye. And in the same moment, the divine justice, thundering from on high, shall destroy their camps with rocks of fire. And then if you remember this quote from the episode about America, China to devour the entire planet. And if you remember in the Polish prophecies, which we covered in the episode about World War III, decades ago, the Polish man wrote that even back then, the Chinese already had full-fledged plans of how to conquer the earth for themselves. So this is the meaning of the Asian tribe takeover point of the timeline. Before making the rest of the episodes of the End Times videos, I will return to finish off series which are started earlier and did not complete, like the videos on healing, ancient healing, and the Vedic use of crystals. There are places called ghost trains, horror rides, or something similar. They put you in a toy train, drive you through a tunnel, and try to scare you with all kinds of skeletons and monsters. I have personally never visited one of them. However, since they stay open, apparently they have many customers who visit them absolutely voluntarily. Not only that, but they even pay entry, they pay money to get scared and drive from far away to subject themselves enthusiastically to this terrifying experience. So obviously they find some sort of value in such type of experience. In the same way, those souls who have taken the decision to participate in the end time horror ride have done so absolutely voluntarily. Absolutely. And exactly as with the ghost trains, once you get on the train, you cannot leave midway. You will stay on the train for the segment you have paid for of the horror ride, and not more and not less. Now, the most important element in this analogy is that the monsters that people see in those children's parks, in the horror rides, are as real as the monsters who will be scaring us during the end times here on earth. However, only exceptions see this true perspective. The majority of people are cemented in this absolutely fraudulent perception that the monsters in the children's park are just fantasy, while the events of the tribulation will be real. That's how people distortedly perceive it. And everybody around also does the same, and that's how they convince each other that this is the truth. But from the point of view of our higher selves, both experiences have the same validity. Ultimately, taking into consideration the immortality of the soul, the tribulation can harm you as much as the paper skeletons in the ghost ride. This is the point which confuses even people who are sincerely interested in spirituality. They do not want to consider the possibility that their higher self, in its greatly expanded consciousness, can have different philosophical system than their incarnation here on earth. And that's where the entire vicious chain of false logic starts. Then such people say, if I decide my reality, I do not want to participate in the tribulation, period. I will not participate. Yeah, but sadly they fail to look around, that to easily realize that by far most of the people definitely don't get whatever they dream for in their lives, no matter how strong they desire it, no matter how much they meditate on it, and even struggle like insane to achieve it. So apparently, obviously, there are deeper levels that need to be understood if one really wants to figure out how do thoughts project into reality. Obviously, it's not that you think it at the end. That is what starts happening to you from now on. This simply doesn't work. While on the other hand, that our thoughts, our consciousness influences and actually manifests the events around us, the proof of that is abundant. And that's why I encourage you to investigate those deeper levels of consciousness. Usually people call them subconscious. They're accessible gradually through the meditation which I outlined in the video called Simple Meditation Practice. And as far as tuning your psyche in a way that it will manifest only happy situations, For that, I recommend to you the books of Jane Roberts. These two things are the only which can practically help you during the tribulation, and this is how exactly they will do it. After understanding very well all of these set books, here you can listen to them for free. You will need to listen to each of them at least 2 times to understand it well. You will be capable of start trimming your psyche from unwanted garbage even without going through any external horrors. That by itself, such trimming, will already change some of the external events which are about to come for you personally. For different people, the percentage which can be changed is very different. And then, during the tribulation itself, let's say your lovely home for which you have worked to save all your life is destroyed in earthquake or flood. And by then the insurance agency which should have protected you doesn't even exist anymore. For the common Joe on the street, this will be profound grief and frustration, but for a person who has studied the prophecies, it will have the opposite effect, because he or she will see, wow, all this happened exactly as prophesied and everything else matches the prophecies. That means that in a couple of short years, the new age will start, and then everybody will live not just in abundance but in amazing luxury. So the temporary loss of your current home may not look as bad deal at all. Another hypothetical scenario, you are in bodily pain for some reason, injury or sickness. What you do then is you distance yourself as much as possible from your body. This is a technique that you would have learned presumably by then, following the instructions in the simple meditation video. Or another scenario, let's say they arrest you, they imprison you. That sounds extremely horrible, but people who know the prophecies, this will most likely be happening at the very end of the tribulation, they will not be that disturbed, because they will know that all this will not last very long, probably just weeks or months. Our higher selves might have decided to put us through the tribulation, not because they are dumb to put us through unnecessary suffering, but with the hope that we will learn something.